right. Do you have spicy take? Or are we going to start with a spicy take?
Well, one thing I really want to start with, honestly, is I want to dig a little bit deeper into Josh's setup.
Oh, okay.
Because
I was
I'm
like,
like
we're
a
just going to jump
lighting and
in.
audio nerd, so like I want to know about like your mic sounds amazing, same mic, but like what are you running it through, and then how are you
Yeah.
doing your lighting?
Yeah, it's funny because I can't remember when you put out the blog post, but you put out a blog post of your setup maybe like
Ah,
4 years ago. Maybe it might have been even longer. But I use that for inspiration of like the whole mounting everything underneath the desk because
yes,
that is like one of the things that I really love. So I have a standing desk, but I knew that I needed everything mounted so that when I press standing, I don't want to have the camera to like move it out
yes,
of the way and like move the stuff. So like literally it's all one power cable that goes to a thing. So I can press one button, turn the lights on, turn my
yes.
desk on, everything. Yeah, my lighting setup is probably overkill for this room. It's just I have this light, so I might as well use them. But my mic, Shure SM7B running through a DBX286S, and then
That's what I got.
have those. Yeah, it's nice. It's again super overkill, but it's fun. And then that's just run through my audio interface, which is a Motu M2. Yeah, so I basically
I
just have
had
the
that whole
settings. And then,
setup.
yeah.
I had that whole setup, and then I decided to slim down and just go with all this Elgato stuff. And I
Oh, there
hope
you
it
go.
didn't affect the audio quality, but like everything that I tested, I was like, I can't tell a difference. And so
Yeah.
Do you
now I
like it
just
better?
have it's a little box that attaches to the back of the Stream Deck. Like
Hmm.
it's beautiful.
Really?
Yeah. So now
I
there's
like
like
the
one
Elgato
thing on
stuff.
my desk, no audio interface, no preprocessor,
Really?
all that stuff. Yeah.
Huh. Because I think the difference is I sorry if I missed this because I'm trying to tweet out the episode, but I have the Scarlet, what 2i2 or whatever
Mm-hmm.
thing versus what you have because the DBX goes into the Scarlet and then that goes into my computer.
Okay.
I think that's the only difference. And I got the DBX. I tried to like upgrade my setup during COVID. And during COVID, it was so hard to find gear. I don't know if you guys remember this, but it was like everybody decided they're going to do a podcast or video. And so I had so much
Prices
trouble
went
trying to
up.
find, the DBX board. So I finally found it used somewhere. And there's one, I think the only thing that doesn't work is there's one little knob on there where it's supposed to light up to a certain level, and that light up gauge doesn't work right. So I just have kind of
Oh,
had to
okay.
guess.
Yeah,
But how are you doing your lights? Do you've got like multiple, like what are you using for them?
yeah. So I have one uh key light up here
Yeah.
that is so like this room is technically pretty small. It's like 7 foot by 10 foot, so it was smaller type of room, and so I knew I wanted to like use up as much space, so all of the lights are mounted on the walls, just like these like mounting
Ooh,
arms.
sick.
So I have like one light down here that's just pointing back to light up that space, so I didn't because I didn't want to have anything lit over here. In my old studio, I had something like directly behind my chair pointing to it so I could hide it. Then there's another one right here that points back. And then there's one above me that's pointing down. And so it's like that one's mounted pretty high up. So yeah, there's technically 4 lights, but these two are mostly just to point back. This one's not colored and this one's colored.
Are they all key lights or you have different ones?
They are the I can't remember the exact name of them, but on Amazon I had a they're just kind of like a 3 set, and then I had 2 of them from other things. So I was just like, okay, I have 4. So they're just
Gotcha.
RGB. What's like the name? Let's see, 800D. I don't know what brand it is, but yeah,
Okay.
they're like the cheapest ones I could find. I was like, okay, they'll work good. They've been serving me well, and they're just mounted directly into the wall.
Yeah, that is awesome. Anytime you can mount something to a desk, to a wall, it just cleans everything up,
Oh yeah.
declutters. That's something I got to do is I only have one light here and then like all
Mhm.
the lights in the room, but I need to
Yeah.
do like a better, what's it called? Like a key light and a fill light, do like the real 3-point lighting setup
Good.
on myself here.
Yeah, it's always tough with like you're like, especially if you're on camera a lot, like you are, it's like, okay, I can't have them shown though too. So where am I putting them where it's like still close enough to be light the stuff I need, but not far enough away where it's like, okay, now I have to worry about hiding this in a way.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Sorry if I missed this part. Do you have any automation set up where you can just be like, hey Google, Studio Lab, or whatever?
No automations really. I mean, like I have I probably I used to have in my old setup when I was at my house, I kind of like moved things because my daughters were getting old enough where they could like open doors, and it wasn't working for recording. But I used to have the automation where I could like hit my Stream Deck and it would turn on OBS and do all things. But really, I just have everything plugged into one outlet. So before I get into the office, it's just like on a like a smart outlet, so I can just hit on and it'll turn on lights and turn on my standing desk, which has the DBX and mounted to it and all that stuff. So yeah, so no automations, but one switch, which makes things a lot easier.
Yeah, for sure.
Dude, I recommend the automations on the Steam Deck. I got to the point where with one push of a button, it would like tweet out that I was going live, turn on my lights, open OBS, start a 5-minute countdown. It was one press to get up and running, and to eliminate that friction just made it so much easier to like sit down and be like, let's go.
Oh yeah, 100%.
It feels magical too when you're like,
oh yeah, you feel like a pilot or something. You do that, like just the room lights up.
So I've been eyeing the Elgato teleprompter just because I want to be able to move from here. Like, I want to look like I'm looking at you in the eye. And then it has a nice little arm on it. So I'm like, if that can just like cover my camera, then I have my camera on a tripod on my desk. So when you're talking about mounting things, I'm like, I can get that desk space back, just have that on an arm and be able to move it in and out of the way. So I've been eyeing that.
Yeah. I have the Elgato prompter, not here actually, because I tried it, I got it, and I was like, okay, it would be perfect for here, but I'm so close to the wall behind me, like that's right there, that it didn't quite work for my setup, and like it was a little too bouncy, where like if I touched my desk, it shook a lot more just because of how I was mounted it. If it was directly on the floor, or if I had a stronger arm, I probably could have done it.
Interesting.
But I ended up just moving it to my house setup, which is in a garage with my iPhone and a green screen, but it works great still, where I can have it as like, I almost like it as a separate monitor in some ways, because it's like an additional monitor without having to be a monitor within your Mac settings, which is really interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
It can actually do stuff besides text. Can you show images? And oh wow.
Yep, it can be like a completely separate monitor, so you can put like Zoom or like whatever have you like over it and just watch it.
So I'd move like the StreamYard. Yeah, the StreamYard stuff right there. So then I could just look at it and I'd see all of your faces.
Yeah. That way you're looking exactly at whoever the people.
I thought like the prompter thing is neat, but I don't do that many like, formal videos like that. But now knowing it can just be like a literal monitor, that's beautiful. It just gets, looking at yourself being like, do I look fine?
Yeah. Well, and I script stuff when I'm doing like tutorial videos and things like that. So I'm like, it would be nice to have that, but it's like, then I've got to get the updated Stream Deck with the knobs so that I can adjust the speed. So, I mean, it's just like, if you give a mouse a cookie, get all the other things.
They buy audio equipment. If you give them a cookie,
I know, right?
How it goes.
Well, here's the other question. Do you know anything about the weight load? So my camera right now is actually, I mean, I could swap it out, but it is kind of heavy how I have it rigged right now.
Yeah, I think like, so they have like kind of multiple spots. So like it mounts on any arms. Like that part of the load isn't big. It just kind of depends on like what your lens size is, because they have kind of like just a generic one, which is just a huge opening for the lens, but then they also have like specific slots. So if you want to mount the prompter on the camera rather than the camera on the prompter, you can do that.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
If that makes sense. Because some of them you can technically put the prompter in between your camera and its lens. So it's kind of just like camera, prompter, and then everything else. And it's kind of just being held on by your camera.
Yes,
yeah, my camera was not the way.
I have a Parrot teleprompter on my camera.
Okay, yeah.
So that just, for anybody that's listening, all that does is it like slides onto the lens, exactly what you're talking about. And this one, you have an app on your phone that then you slide your phone in, and that it'll use the app on your phone, and it'll just kind of go up. And it's in terms of speed, I just have it set to a certain speed that I have to basically maintain. It's not. I'm sure there's apps out there that can understand what I'm saying to know to scroll, or I think it came with a controller that you could use to control, but I'm like, it just got too complicated. I'm like, just scroll.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's a lot of overhead. You should just be reading, and it should have a mic on it, listening to you and just moving.
Yeah. No big deal. No big deal. Okay, we can go ahead and get started. We've talked a lot about gear. And yeah, it's gonna be a fun episode. Okay. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Compressed FM, a podcast all about web design and development with a little bit of zest. In today's episode, we have my good friend Josh. He is on the DevRel team at Laravel. He also just released a video about TanStack, so we're excited to talk to him about both of these things.
Yeah, super glad to be here. Thanks so much, Brad and Amy, for having me. Awesome. Huge fan, first time caller kind of thing.
Sweet. Cue the music.
Web development and design, who would have guessed? Well, we can do them both, even add a little zest. So turn up the volume, get ready for the best. Let's get it started in this episode of Compressed.
Sweet. Hello, my name is Amy Dutton. I am a core maintainer on the Redwood JS core team.
Hey, y'all. My name is Brad Garapi, and I'm a senior front-end developer at Stripe.
And like I said, we have my good friend Josh. Welcome to the show, Josh.
Hey, thanks so much. Yeah, I am DevRel at Laravel, and I kind of do a couple other things like with their support team and stuff like that as well. But yeah, super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Sweet. Now, before we get into the meat of the episode, I did want to highlight our sponsor. We have Wix Studio, and if you haven't checked out Wix, I would definitely encourage you to do so. I feel like in the past, they've really been geared towards no code or low code, but lately they have put so much emphasis on the developer community and really helping raise the bar in terms of the pieces and components that they offer to developers. Because the thing is, we're not only having to develop sites for us, but also for business teams and marketing teams. And so Wix really provides the best tools for us to be able to do our job and provide a customized experience while also providing the business and marketing and everybody else on your team the tools that they need. So definitely go check out Wix Studio. And I'm excited. We're going to have someone from Wix Studio on in a couple of weeks to talk about the product and some of the things that go on behind the scenes to making all of that a reality. So in the meantime, go check out Wix Studio at wix.com. Cool. Let's jump into all the things. Brad, do you have questions ready to go?
Yeah. Okay.
Like I knew you did. I knew you did.
Always. I love having guests on like you, Josh, because you know stuff that I don't know. I have no experience with Laravel, but I definitely feel the longing for something more in JavaScript world. The backend tooling is just not where I think it needs to be. So let's start with Laravel, and then we can transition into like your recent experience with TanStack Start and maybe other front-end meta frameworks. Sell us on Laravel. I'm a JavaScript developer. I know React. I can make single-page applications, but like now I need to send an email or connect to a database or do a cron job. Like, how does Laravel play into all this? Why should I care?
Yeah. I think the sell really started as like my own personal like story as well, in a lot of sense, where I kind of was very super front end centric in the sense that anything that I built, I didn't really know what a database was for like the longest time, because it was like, okay, I just kind of learned HTML, CSS, and then JavaScript, and then slowly like would learn like React, and like, okay, now I'm picking up Vue. But even then, it was like, okay, I know what Firebase is, and I know what like Supabase is, and I know what a database is, but I don't really need it just yet until there was specific ideas that I had in my mind. That's like, okay, now I know that I need like authentication, and I need a database, and I need, well, okay, now I'm hooking into Firebase or Supabase. I'm doing all that, and that was fine for like a good year. And now I have an idea or a project or a client in mind where it's like, okay, but now I need to run something longer than 45 seconds or whatever the standard kind of like serverless function runtime is. I don't know how to do that. I always say like I feel like my learning has always come from the projects or like ideas that I've had in mind. And so it just got to this point where like I felt like I was learning something new and I was like having to kind of blend it like, okay, now I'm learning and kind of like as a clarifying standpoint, I think like it's awesome that there are so many great options within like the JavaScript ecosystem when it comes to even things now like queues and crons and like, you know, Upstash for like having all of these pieces. But at the same time,
it's a service, right? It's like,
yeah,
it's a build that you have that you're bolting onto this project. And what if that service goes down, or what if it changes, or what if you need a new feature that it doesn't offer? It's just like another integration point that's sitting in the back of your head saying, when is this going to fail me, or when am I going to have to move on from this?
Yeah. And really it came down to, for me, is like that same thing of like, okay, it's something different, but if I'm using it with one of these, you know, front end frameworks, well, maybe they don't care about that integration anymore, kind of thing. And then like, okay, now I'm instead of having to just search in the docs for this, now I'm having to search externally for how do I use X with Y. And it's more me learning how those pieces work together rather than me learning each individual pieces.
It's a non-transferable skill. You have taught yourself how to integrate A with B, and that's all you know. You're not giving yourself anything else for the future.
Yeah, exactly. I don't really know A or B. I just know how A and B work together.
Yeah.
And it got to this point, like, well, I've always loved just learning new things in the sense that I would have like this project in mind. Usually my project was like a glorified to-do list in the sense that I want a URL and I want to save it like a bookmark. And this is like this project that I came up with like 4 years ago in the sense that anything I knew or anything new I wanted to learn, I want to learn how to build this because I knew exactly how it should work for given stuff.
And it's and I love that idea because I have the same thing. It's like anytime I pick up something new, I need to be able to save data and make it user specific. And if I can do that across any stack that I learn, you're kind of setting the minimum viable product bar for yourself.
Exactly.
And your thing was like user specific data and stuff too, right? Like, you know, permissions and things like that.
Yep. User specific data, specific to like, because then you learn a little bit of like validation too. So like mine was like URLs because I didn't want people to save, you know, numbers. That wasn't a URL. So like you're kind of learning. I was like, okay, if I knew how to do this within just like you said, Brad, like I now know how all of these stacks work. And at least, even if I never build in that stack again, I feel like I know enough.
Enough to be dangerous. Yeah. You can build something. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I would do that probably like every night or every like new stack or thing that came in. And there was this point where I was like working on, you know, just personal stuff as well as like client stuff. And I was like, okay, I really just want to find one that I feel very confident in.
When did this happen for you? Right? Because I'm like going through this identity crisis now, right?
This was around just over 2 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. So just over 2 years ago, I think it was around September of 2022. Yeah. When I was like, I had like built 80% of a bunch of like SaaS ideas that I had, as most developers do. It's like, okay, hey, I have this SaaS idea. Yeah. I like build up like 70% of it. And I just never crossed the finish line, mostly because like I either one got bored or two came up against something that I was like, this is going to take too much time. I don't want to do it. So my whole goal was like, I want to find something where I can actually like ship a product and like make, even if it doesn't make any money, just like, okay, I can say I built something that
Right.
people use. And so I each night I would build that like bookmark thing. Like, okay, at the time, the most one that I was like comfortable with was probably like SvelteKit with Supabase or Next.js with Supabase. And so I was like, okay, I know how to do this. And I don't even think at then like Clerk was kind of like just coming out. So I was like, okay, I know enough about that kind of like auth side. But even with stuff, it was like, okay, it would take me a full night. Most of my coding has been done in the evenings when my kids go to bed. And now I'm just, now I did all the setup. Now the next day I actually to build the logic. So I tried Rails, I tried Phoenix with Elixir, and I tried pretty much everything. I tried Redwood, I tried Blitz.js, I tried all the meta ones like T3Stack and stuff like that, and I tried Laravel, and it pretty much came down to two things of like the reason why I was like, okay, my next project I'm building in Laravel. One was I ran like the starting code, and I had an authentication and dashboard and database all connected. I was like,
it's wild.
This is pretty cool. And then two, I hadn't really written any PHP before, other than like I had modified WordPress stuff and modified PHP BB themes when I was like in junior high or whatever. And that, PHP's syntax made more sense to me than Ruby's syntax.
Yes.
Which kind of blows
100%.
people's minds because they're like, oh, Ruby's like readable. I'm like, it just didn't make sense to me because I came from JavaScript and it looks more like JavaScript than Ruby does. Yeah. And that's pretty much what I decided. And then all of a sudden, like when I built my first project in like a week, and like I was like, okay, I actually like shipped this, and it's like something I'm like, oh, this is really cool to use. I'd actually built it in Vue too, and I hadn't really done much Vue. And it was one of those things of like, okay, if I can do this and have all the pieces I need answered, then what would it look like if I just like kept building fun things in it? So now it's like, it's just fun for me to start a new project now, like, because I know exactly the pieces that I need to build it. And I still love trying new things like, TanStack, for example. But yeah, that's kind of where my identity crisis happened and the process it took to get to there.
So we always talk about whether you're coming from the front end and heading towards the back end, or whether you're coming from the back end and heading towards the front end. And you decided, I guess, that the problems that Laravel solved for your back end was a better starting point. And so the friction point then is, okay, now you need to answer some of the front end questions.
Yeah.
What does Laravel do like out of the box for your Vue layer? And what happens when you kind of reach that wall where you're like, I need more, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question, especially because it's funny because I have an answer that most people, if they're looking at my, my history of like, oh yeah, you were in JavaScript, you use React and Svelte. So you probably just like keep using that in the front end of Laravel. And you can within Laravel. So Laravel kind of has like two options and three technically options. You can write just kind of like plain HTML and what would be called blade syntax. And similar to like Rails's HTML.erb stuff, where it's just very like server side rendered views. And then you do
like
full
React
post
server
requests.
Components.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of like full post requests where you have to have like an API for like a route and that kind of thing. So that's kind of like the I guess like classic option. And then there's two newer options that are probably the more of the what you would see now within a Laravel setup is there's something called inertia, which is basically a glue. And this isn't even Laravel specific. There's kind of like adapters for Phoenix and Rails and even JavaScript stuff like Adonis. But inertia is like the glue that says, okay, instead of having to write API requests to connect my front end and back end, instead, every single time my router requests a specific page, I'm just going to serve a React file or a Vue file or a Svelte file instead. And so that is very common right now, and pretty much like what the Laravel team itself uses for most of our projects. Is like they're kind of built with React with inertia. And so you don't have to have these two separate code bases. It's all one code base. You're just instead having this pages folder directory in your JavaScript directory that just says, okay, now I'm, instead of serving up a .blade.php file, I'm serving a dashboard.jsx, and I'm passing information from the server to that file that I can do whatever as props kind of thing in JavaScript. So that would be like kind of like the more kind of like standard option, because you kind of like, okay, if you know JavaScript, it's pretty much the same thing. You're just writing it on your Vue file and you're just being passed props from the back end. The other option is something called Livewire. And this is the one that I kind of like latched onto, even though I know JavaScript. I don't know, or I didn't know PHP that well. But Livewire is basically, if you have seen HTMX or even like Live View within Phoenix, it is basically HTML over the wire. So not JSON, it's not WebSockets, but it's basically saying it's the connection magic and bridge layer, where in your view you can say something like, okay, I want to model this with a variable that I have stored on the server state. And so anytime that changes, it's hitting the server, it's making a server request and basically sending HTML over the server. So it's really similar. I kind of talked about it in my TanStack video. It's really similar to like React server components, just with the PHP syntax versus a JavaScript syntax. And so that's why I kind of latched on, because there's something within Laravel Livewire called Volt. So many names, but Volt is a single file component for Livewire, in the sense that classically you would probably write your logic in one file, like your kind of like what a controller or an API route would be. And you would say, okay, I have this function, and in my Vue file, I can call that function and it runs on the server. What Volt kind of does is it pushes it all in one file, and it says, okay, I can have my logic up on the top and my view down the bottom. And for me, that just made a lot of sense. And so I kind of like latched onto that. I think it came out about a year and a half ago, Laracon 2023. And I kind of just kept building in there. So I still do some JavaScript stuff within Laravel, but now I kind of almost only write PHP, which is kind of crazy.
And you have a course on Laracasts on using Livewire.
I do. Yeah, I do. Most of my videos, if on my YouTube channel, are probably like mostly talking about Livewire in a lot of sense. But yeah, I do have a Laracast course where I kind of built an app from start to almost finished within Livewire.
Do you kind of relate this to like the Apple ecosystem a little bit? Like once you kind of buy into Laravel, you just kind of thought that Livewire was a better fit than trying to jam React into the front end. That makes sense?
Yeah, maybe in some sense, but I think it more was the DX itself. And so I think I think if I was on a team, for example, I think it's like your goals at the end of the day too. Like if I was on a team and we're like, okay, hey, we need this specific UI setup, like having the options available, like the libraries, and being able to use those without having to leave Laravel is crazy. Just knowing that, okay, I can use, Motion, or I can use, even ShadCN, or, I've Tremor, the graph library within React, like all that stuff. It's cool to be like, okay, I don't have to mess with any of my settings, because Laravel uses Vite to like run it all. So I don't have to do really anything. It just works. So that's really nice. I think the thing that really solidified me with kind of like sticking with Livewire was less syntax and more of like DX of how I'm understanding how things are like passed from back end to front end. So within inertia, you probably are writing more, which is like the glue layer for React and Vue. You're probably writing more MVC type stuff. And I didn't come from an MVC background. So it was weird for me to be like, okay, anytime I want to have this form submit something, I have to write a controller endpoint, and then I'm writing that in my logic and then passing it back to a new view in React. And it was kind of like separated to the point that it just didn't make sense in my mind. It was like, this should be easier. And so when I started building within Livewire, it was one of those things where like I didn't have to write controllers or even you still kind of like work with models within Laravel, how it works. But like,
Sure.
I didn't have to set a specific endpoint to say, okay, I want to put a post request to, slash to-dos, and then that's storing the to-dos. Instead, in Livewire, I just write a function that's, public function, save to do.
Right.
And now all of that logic is wrapped up in that function rather than like a new endpoint. And so it just made sense to me with what I was working with within like, Svelte or even like Next.js. And my hot take within the Laravel community would be like, I think if there was people who are coming from like Next.js server components, TanStack, stuff like that, who are like, they're like, oh yeah, this makes sense. Solid Start does it a lot of ways too. My hot take is it might be easier to use Livewire and learn a new syntax rather than learn how to work within like an MVC structure. Because I think a lot of current developers who are learning, you don't really learn how to do all of that. It's kind of like all in one file, or just like, two files, but it's clear separation there.
Right.
I feel like a lot of our listeners are JavaScript developers. So let's describe and explain what MVC stands for. Yeah.
So, and you guys might be able to do this better than me, but MVC is Model View Controller, in the sense that within Laravel, or pretty much like Rails, and even, if you're building something within like a traditional Mern or Maven stack or whatever, you might have your model kind of tells the database what it is doing, or how things should be stored within the database, and what kind of parameters that should be stored within your specific models that might be related to tables in some way. Views is basically everything that the user is seeing on the page, what the router is saying. Okay, when someone hits /about, they should receive this view. That could be JavaScript or server render or whatever that might be. And then controller is basically it would probably be mostly akin to like an API directory in Next.js, where you kind of have this single source of truth, where you are saying, anytime I want to make a post request or a GET request or a patch request or a store request or whatever that might be, then you're going to kind of in the controller say, okay, I'm interacting with my model and doing server logic stuff, and then I'm passing additional parameters or storing things and then passing things to the view. So it's kind of like this 3-point separation of concerns, instead of more commonly today, it's probably only 2 separation of concerns within JavaScript ecosystem.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I think.
So like eventually you're gonna have a need for JavaScript. You're gonna need to do something client side with JavaScript.
Yep.
One of the beautiful things about building all in the JavaScript ecosystem is that when your backend is written in the same language as your front end, any of the types that you have for your APIs and your data structures, just kind of like they can be generated and used on the client side, or maybe it's literally the same code base, and like the types are just present for you. Do you find any friction at that boundary where, like, maybe you've got API endpoints or data on your back end and your database models, for example? How do you like type those in the front end when you're working on them?
Yeah, it's a good question.
I suppose this is only a problem, right, when you're using React or Svelte or something, or well, even if you're just using vanilla JavaScript, maybe I don't know, but I guess it's not as much of a problem in Livewire, let's say.
Yeah, and I would say it's still like a problem in Livewire, in the sense that like maybe people who are coming from the JavaScript world, who are like specific type centric, that might not blend that well within Livewire, because you kind of like in a lot of ways, yes, there are types within PHP, where you can say, this particular variable is going to be a string, or this particular variable is a number, or whatever that might be. But I'll start within Livewire, and then we can go to like the inertia. But then within Livewire, you don't necessarily have that front to back end type safety, in the sense that you're kind of waiting on the server then to tell you if that type is incorrect. And there are some awesome packages. Like, I think one of the benefits of the Laravel community and ecosystem is like, pretty much someone's solved a problem that you're trying to solve in some way, shape, or form. And because Laravel is so, because it's, all in one piece, you're not having to, you kind of just can be like, okay, I'm going to take that and use it. So there probably are some packages of doing that a little bit better. But for the most part, I wasn't someone who was very type safety. So it's like, that didn't, I didn't use TypeScript. I just used JavaScript. It was something that didn't matter as much to me, in the sense that the return types that I needed in PHP and like the variable types were enough for me. Within the inertia world, it's not going to be as maybe seamless is a good word, as something like TRPC, which is very like that's awesome to me to know that, like, okay, I can change it on my server, and now I know within my IDE or whatever you have that this is now a completely different named variable or whatever. It might not be as specific as that, but there are a lot of packages, and even the starter kits within Laravel have options for TypeScript out of the box, where basically it will basically like create those types as you create them on the server, and then you're passing those types as or as named types when you access them on the client. So it's not as seamless, but it's still available in that sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of stuff going on in chat. Emma Light said, I've never heard anyone say bad things about Laravel, so props to you guys. But I think that poses a good question then. What are some of the things that you guys are aware of that might be pain points or reasons why you might not want to reach for Laravel and might want to reach for something else?
Yeah. I think, and I'll preface this as like, if my bosses are watching this is probably more my personal opinions kind of thing. But I think there are a lot of things that we are aware of like just what is difficult to get into Laravel. I think that's currently like the biggest one, and I think it's come from even just like the last couple of years, where there seems to be a little bit more press and almost like FOMO kind of thing of like, oh, maybe I should try Laravel, like Primogen speaking at Laracon, like all this type of stuff. And I think it comes down to, there's so much to learn when you're getting into a batteries included framework, if you're not already aware of what's available within a batteries included framework. And so I think understanding it is huge, in something that, the team and myself and just everyone at Laravel is aware of, in the sense that it'd be nice if we could put that in as many places as possible. And I think it's nice to see how well the Laravel team is at receiving some of that criticism as well. Like about a month and a half ago, I think it was like the day Amy and I were recording for the web dev challenge. Like that day was the day, of course, that Theo decided to try out Laravel. And so there was like a lot of bad press in a lot of ways, because there is a lot of stuff that can be better, in the sense like, okay, I don't have PHP installed. What do I do? And I think you can either take criticism like that and you can say like, oh, you just don't know what Laravel is about, or you're not smart enough, or like get better, that kind of thing. Or you can say, yeah, that's a valid concern. Like someone coming from the JavaScript world who wants to use like brew install, or just have one line of code they can copy and paste, install everything, and not have to install X, Y, or Z or third party things. And the Laravel team, Taylor specifically, basically like got on calls and basically like, okay, what can we do to make this better, and hear those criticisms. And even just within like the last month and a half, like we've put out stuff that I think betters that and answers those questions. So I think understanding when to take criticism is one thing that Laravel does pretty well, in the sense that what are some additional criticisms? I think a lot of it kind of comes down to more just it's less of like being able to tell people of how good Laravel is, and kind of like trying to break down walls of what people might have an understanding of PHP. And that's something that I think it's hard to combat. And it's one of those things that I think the team itself is always trying to be aware of. Like, okay, when people say PHP sucks, usually they're like PHP 4.2 that they tried 15 years ago and they haven't tried it again. And so it's kind of like this this almost retraining of people's thoughts of like, okay, the PHP isn't the PHP of yore. And I think there's a lot of great people who are kind of speaking into that, but it's one of those things that, you know, it's tough for Laravel. And I think while there's so much, just like within any stack or any framework or any language, you can get 99% of the way there for 90% of projects. But if you are running billions of requests per second, then maybe PHP isn't the right option, kind of thing. It's one of those things that it's just, I think it's first showing that you can do most things, and then showing that, of course, there's going to be options when you don't necessarily need it. Or, you know, like, for example, I love Livewire, but it's probably not the option for every single project. If I was building Night Watch, which is like the latest product from Laravel that we announced at Laracon in Australia, that would be very tough to do within Livewire, because it would be a lot of JavaScript that I would be writing custom by hand, and React makes perfect sense for that. So I think it's understanding limitations, and then also just, you know, making sure that you're aware where those limitations are.
Sure. So you said two things I want to respond to.
Yeah.
One, I think probably the biggest mental hurdle that people will have to come over from, say, React to Laravel is the fact that in JavaScript, we've moved really far away from class-based components to functional-based components. When you're dealing with PHP, a lot of it does become class-based. The second thing that's really interesting to me, so we had Aaron Francis on a while back. So his episode was released maybe about a month ago. One of the things that he said was that with Laravel, Taylor, the creator, has created products around Laravel. And so the nice thing is you get to use your own product, kind of get to dog food it, figure out what's good and what's not, but also what you're creating also benefits the community. And I think that Taylor has a good handle on what those pain points are. So things where, say, Theo's like, how do I get PHP on my computer? Yeah. You have a product called Herd that handles all that for you, and it's just a one-click thing. I think for me, the most impressive thing about Herd is sometimes there's issues with cookies and privacy and security, specifically with Safari. You have to have HTTPS locally working. And with Herd, that's just a one-click. And all of a sudden you have HTTPS working, which is amazing. Or, you know, I'm thinking about deployment can sometimes be difficult, especially when you're coming from JavaScript, where I'm like, I just tell Vercel where my Git repo is, and it immediately deploys everything. Now with Laravel, I'm having to manage a server, which might not be difficult, but for someone that doesn't have the DevOps experience to be able to set all that stuff up and install it, you have Forge, you have Envoyer, which do that for you, but it still can be a little rough around the edges. But now you guys have released Laravel Cloud, so it's like you don't even have to worry about any of that. So I think that's really cool how he's able to have a pulse on the community, create tools to benefit the community, not only from a let me use my own tool and figure out what can be better, but also this tool will make the entire community better and make the whole experience easier.
Yeah, I think like 2 points that, I think one is, you know, I've always said this even before I joined the Laravel team. Like it's evident that the community itself built around Laravel is top down in the sense that I think Taylor really does kind of trickle down his own, thoughts and opinions. And you kind of have to be this like DHH is for Rails. You kind of have to be like this specific personality. I think that kind of trickles down into the Laravel community in the sense that almost every single feature that was released within Laravel, and of course not all of them because a lot of them are community contributed, but within the framework itself, it's, hey, we were building this, or we were trying out in like a new project, and this is like Taylor itself or just our team. And it's like, oh, it'd be nice if we could do this. And so, okay, let's put it in the framework. So now you can do that. And so it comes around actually building things instead of thinking of what you might want to build things. But then the second point you mentioned is like, I think could be like another criticism of Laravel, especially if you're coming from like the JavaScript where we're like, okay, I have this one thing, and then if I need to do something else, I have these 3 other separate packages or services I could bring in. Within Laravel, you kind of almost have this option paralysis in a lot of ways for almost everything. I kind of already mentioned, like on the front end, you kind of have 3 different options. And even within those, then you have, okay, do you want React, Vue, Svelte? There's so many ways to accomplish a lot of things within Laravel, even when it comes to deployment. Like Laravel itself has first party options for deploying to servers, deploying to AWS, deploying to now a managed cloud, which will be released soon. But there's so many ways to accomplish things. There's within starter kits, there's technically 2 versions of starter kits. There's one that's kind of a little bit more less limited called Breeze. And then there's one that's a little bit more full that has like team offerings and API and stuff like that. And even within the code of Laravel framework itself, there's like, okay, you have the out of the box authentication stuff, but then you also have this package called Fortify, which allows you to do a little bit more like API and token management and stuff like that. And so I think it's one of those things that dependent on your personality, maybe as a developer, like some people really like, hey, I love having the options and I can just kind of pick and choose what works best for me or like what resonates with me. But some people are like, okay, I just like one thing. You tell me I install this and I have to add everything else myself. And so there is kind of that balance that I think Taylor does as good as he can. Like you're never going to make everyone else happy, but there's a balance of having to say, okay, these are the opinions that are going to be included within the framework, and these are the ones that are not. So like Laravel developers kind of just accepted that we all use Tailwind. If you don't, you can just uninstall it and use it. But it's installed out of the box for every single install. And it's things like that maybe other communities, if you install Tailwind by default, you might get a lot of people upset. So I think I know that there are, especially in the past, even before I got into Laravel, there was a lot of times when it was like, hey, one change was made in the framework and now everyone's upset. There's so much of that I think has to be thought of when you're like creating and running and maintaining a framework. But I think it really comes down to as long as you're building things, as long as you're like shipping things, like that's the mindset. And that's really what I think every decision kind of comes down to within the framework too.
Yeah, they also have concept of drivers a lot of times, which is pretty cool. So some of the options that you have available to you, say like with storage, you can do. I was developing a Laravel project locally where I was just using Laravel local storage, so it's saving all those files. And then I pushed it live to production, and it wasn't saving files with DigitalOcean. So I was like, what do I do? Well, DigitalOcean has a thing called storage. It's built, I think, just off of AWS, but you can hook into that. And so all I had to do was set up that driver. I didn't have to change any of my logic. All of my functions still worked. I just changed the parameters and the keys that it was passing in. So it's no longer passing in local stuff. It's passing in DigitalOcean stuff. To me, that was like a mind explosion moment where it's like, this is so nice. Like I can swap things out without having to refactor. So I appreciate other things that you guys have done like that to give people options and services, but that it doesn't mess up your code.
That is really interesting, and something that like it was kind of another not shock, but almost like, oh, that's really nice from coming from the JavaScript world. Even in the sense of, if I was to build a complete application, most of the time I'm building it within SQLite on my local machine, because that's just what Laravel kind of ships with out of the box. But two, I don't have to think about anything. If I was to deploy that, like to Laravel Cloud, which currently uses Postgres, if I was to deploy that, for example, to any place, I just swap my environment variable, say that it's using Postgres instead of SQLite, and everything just works. I don't have to change any code. Of course, there are, if you're there are like certain things, like if you're using Postgres specific database queries or something like that, then yes, of course. But same thing with like file drivers. I know that like when Amy and I were on the Web Dev Challenge, I could just use the AWS file driver for Tigris because it was an AWS specific thing. I didn't have to find a specific Laravel Tigris connection or even Laravel AWS connection. It just kind of just works out of the box, and all that stuff really blows my mind in a lot of ways, because I always say I'm a lazy developer. I just want it to work. I don't really care like how it's working or like who built it for me. Just let it work.
We need to include a link in the show notes, but Josh and I were both on Jason Linksdorf's Web Dev Challenge or Web Dev Day, where we built an application in 4 hours. And I think it was pretty obvious at the event, just coming from framework world, how much a framework gives you, that we were able to move pretty quick.
Boom, found it. It's in the chat.
There we go.
Well, let's pivot a little bit and talk about your recent exploration with a new React meta framework. You just put out this YouTube video where you explore TanStack Start. It's something that I've been briefly looking into, and so I was really interested to hear like how it went for you, and maybe compare it to what it does on the server versus what Laravel might do on the server.
Yeah, like anytime I'm looking at new meta frameworks, stuff like that, like I kind of am comparing it now to like the DX I've kind of learned to love and appreciate within Livewire, even more specifically than within Laravel in a lot of ways, just because I know that these meta frameworks are front end focused first for the most part. And I know that, the cool thing is like there's a lot of teams and people who have like built, Next.js apps, and then they're using Laravel for queues or like some specific thing where you can just kind of like hook into it or anything else like that. So that's always like kind of on the back of my mind as one, when I'm learning something new, of like, okay, how easy would this be to just, now I'm just hitting an API route to my Laravel application within that domain. But then two, I'm always curious of how people are solving the like server components, or just like the fact of I want to make a request to the server so that this is something that if I'm writing to a database or even pulling from a database or doing anything, you don't want that on the client. And of course, things like Supabase or Firebase allow you to do that on the client safely if you want. But what interested me about TanStack Start was the idea of those server functions, of being able to say, I can just call this JavaScript function and I know what it's doing because it's in the same exact file, because it makes sense, because it's part of this, file, and not have to write a whole new API route to do the one thing that I need to do. In this case, write to a file on the server. And I think the part that kind of interests me about all these meta frameworks, I think Solid Start does it in a lot of ways. The difference between Solid Start, I think you only can have one server side function. At least the last time I looked at it, you can only have one server side function per file, in the sense that you can only have one post. You can't kind of have two posts or two gets.
It's the same way Remix works. It's like they categorize by URL path essentially, and so when you call an action, you can only have one action. But of course, there's ways to differentiate. You can send in a form with a different, key on it and then trigger different server action. But there's only one entry point for that particular spot.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, and I think that was what interested or just like what excited me the most about when I was like playing around with TanStack Start. And in that video, it wasn't edited. There's a lot of things that I was like editing it, and I was like, I really missed that. Or I was like, oh, I don't know how to write JavaScript as good as I thought I did anymore. But I think the thing that I've always said is going to be, because a lot of people usually ask me now of like, okay, why isn't there a Laravel within JavaScript? Or why isn't there a JavaScript version of Laravel? And I always say, because like it's not going to look exactly like Laravel. Like I get what Adonis is doing. Adonis JS is like a popular one that people kind of point to. And it's taking a lot of niceties from Laravel. But at the same time, people who are writing in Next.js don't want the MVC and they don't want all of these files and things that they want to point to. And I think it's going to be things like TanStack or Astro or like Redwood in the sense like you have all of these things already told for you that makes more sense within the JavaScript ecosystem. And I've always like opinions and niceties, and those are like the two things I look for when I'm like experimenting with new things. And the things that like I liked about TanStack Start was one of those server functions, but then two, that's opinionated in the sense that, okay, instead of writing an API route and doing it, you probably can do that. But it's like, okay, hey, if you want to interact with a server, just do within this function. And so when you have hooks and like packages already kind of like ready for you, even as simple as like links and stuff like that, like, okay, hey, we abstracted all of this stuff for you. So now you can just have this link component. I think those are always nice in my mind because if I needed to edit them or, modify them in some way, I probably could, but most of the time I don't need to.
Yeah. I think front enders are really looking for like a front end framework that has a good portal to the server. Like that's the way I view it. You're like reaching through and doing something on the server and then coming back. But there's still, at the end of the day, there's still a lot to be said for a long running server environment because even with the TanStack Start approach, that can still be, run in a serverless environment. So we're still lacking things like cron jobs, one of the more important things there.
Yeah. And it's stuff like that like, I think if I was to paint the picture of like, okay, hey, here's what my perfect framework would be if it wasn't Laravel or if it wasn't written in PHP, it would be all that stuff for like, I just want to tell my application what to do. And then I don't care like what kind of code is being run like on the back end to set that up. So like if it's like Astro or TanStack Start, like it'd be nice to say like, okay, within my router file, within like a setup file, I played around with like this thing called Wasplang, which is really interesting for a little bit. And they have a similar premise where you could say like, okay, I want a cron job to be run here. And it's just like this function that I import. And then I don't really care how it's working after that, or what adapters I'm using. I just want to be able to have all that set up ready for me, so that when I'm ready to use it, like I want to, have the database already abstracted away, and I just change my connection settings. I want to, be able to have a specific, authentication, package, and maybe it's like sitting on top of it, but now I can use whatever service I want underneath the hood. And I think that's like the next step for JavaScript stuff. You're not going to do away with all these services, and probably for like it helps in a lot of ways, but at the same time, it might be helpful to have opinionated abstractions where you don't have to think about, what does the actual front end code look like for all of this stuff.
Yeah, I think to put a term to it, you want to be like infrastructure agnostic.
Yeah,
like you just want the function definition, and you don't care where or how it runs. And I think Prisma is probably the best example of that in front end world, where they're like,
Yep.
look, this is your DB layer, and you just kind of give us a connection string, and we'll figure out how to go to it. You still have to host it, mind you. You do still have to think about that piece, but at least there's a layer there where your interface to that doesn't change.
Yep. Exactly. Like I would think the same thing with like the server functions, for example. Like,
yeah,
regardless of whether I'm running this on a serverless function or on a long running server, it'd be nice if my code doesn't change for that.
Right.
And kind of like what Amy was talking about within drivers within Laravel, I think that's allowed a lot of developers and myself to build something super quick, is because you're kind of writing the code the same thing every time. But if I was hosting this on, AWS versus on a DigitalOcean server, there might be a few things that change, but for the most part, nothing really changes.
Yeah. And we're starting to get there with these adapter patterns for like the frameworks will use adapters to have build targets for, a long running
Yep.
node server versus a serverless environment versus Cloudflare.
Yep.
But yeah, we need to bring adapters down to like the database level, the cron job level, all these other things where Laravel, the email level, where Laravel was able to apply that at such a granular level. It really just allows developers to think about app logic, and they can hook it up to the services later.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
This is kind of a half-baked idea that it's kind of formulating in my mind as we're talking about all these things. What's interesting about Laravel is that you are in a serverful environment. I know you have like Laravel Vapor where you can do serverless, but it's that serverful environment that allows you to do a lot of that stuff. And I think that's what makes, say, Next.js with Vercel kind of interesting, is Vercel is able to offer services for cron jobs. Where they're able to like build on top of Neon to say, hey, we're going to offer a database layer. And you almost need those things. And so I think that makes a bigger case for your hosting providers, or how you're handling that element, the server element of it, to be able to provide those services. I know we've run into that with Redwood to say, okay, are we going to continue to be serverless, or do we want to encourage people now to say, hey, use your own server? And now, yes, we can provide storage, we can provide background jobs, we can provide cron jobs and all these other things, which we do, but they're not as easy to set up if you're gonna, like, if you're bullish on Vercel, like that, sorry, like then you just don't get access to those features.
It's more decisions, right? Like then you have to figure out, okay, well, where do I host my database, and where do I send email from? And at least if you do rely on your hosting provider, you got one place, one monthly bill, one spot to go check everything.
And I don't think people realize that either. I did kind of a cost breakdown analysis to say, hey, if I build 10 projects on Laravel, what is the cost going to be for that? If I do 10 projects with a serverless environment, I can get free Vercel hosting, but then I'm paying for, $20 a month for resend. I'm paying money for ingest if I want to use that. Like, all those things start to add up. Yes, there are services that you like, but the more that you glue together, it actually makes that more expensive.
Yeah. Wait, has anybody done this before?
What?
I would love to hear those numbers. Like,
I got them.
Do you really?
Release them.
Oh.
I do.
Please, because there's this constant like, do I go get a node server and a bunch of long running stuff? And like, how do you spend your money? Do you lean into serverless, or do you lean into a hosting provider? Or what do you do?
And I think some of that, this is where it gets complicated. I can release my numbers, but it's built on the stack that I would build from.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So like with JavaScript, all that composability, you might say, oh, I'm not going to use resend. I'm going to use, Postlight, or, whatever, or not Postlight. What is it doesn't matter. Whatever mailing service, Postmark. Thank you. MailerLite is a different one, but that's not in this context. But anyways, I can share them for mine. Josh, I'll probably, I will release them, but Josh, before I do, I'll probably get you just to double check them to make sure I got the Laravel stuff right.
Yeah. No, that's super interesting. Yeah. I think it's that almost like double-edged sword when it comes to like the options versus, specific opinions. Is like one of those things. Like I've always said, like I'll never fault Next.js and Vercel for being a one-stop shop, because when you do own everything, it makes those stuff a lot easier. But it's also the double-edged sword of like, okay, now, with the open Next controversy and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, now if you do want to have all those niceties and hoses somewhere, now things get a little bit complicated. So it is a double-edged sword in that sense of, you want to have these options, but at the same time, if you control the options, you can make things nicer, cheaper, whatever have you, in a lot of ways too.
Well, the other thing you have to keep in mind is when I crunch these numbers, some of it was how many projects do I have to build? Like at what point are there certain breaking points? So for example, with Neon, the plan that I'm on right now, I can host up to 10 databases. So then what happens after I have more than 10 databases? Like the pricing changes slightly versus like, say, Laravel, everything's just going to DigitalOcean. And how many Laravel projects do I want to run on a single server instance? Or am I just going to
you can do a lot.
or am I just going to, if they're for different clients though, do I want to put each project on a different server so that I can separate those out a little bit better?
Yeah.
So
and how
that's
much
where some of
traffic
the
are you going to get, and when do you need to scale up that server? It is. It's a lot to like manage and to think about, because there's always those trade-offs. It's like pricing too.
Right. Cool.
Yeah.
I want to bring the. Oh, go ahead, Josh. Go ahead.
I was just saying, one of the things that made me think about when you're talking about like opinions and drivers and stuff like that is also even less so on like the deployment side, and more so I think what I've seen more and more JavaScript frameworks moving into is on the startup side. When you're creating a new project, how much do you want options and availability to put all the pieces together for you? Like Svelte's new starter is something that I think it's amazing. I think more JavaScript frameworks like Astro and like whoever should use that as a starting point in a lot of ways, because if you can say from Svelte new or whatever the actual term is, saying, okay, now I have authentication hooked up with auth.js, and I have my database, and all of those pieces are put together for me in an opinionated way, even if they are separate drivers, separate packages, separate services. I don't have to worry about copying a whole bunch of files and doing all the stuff that you would have to do 90% of the time. I think that's an important segment that the JavaScript world is slowly moving into.
Wes Boss said it best when he said, I want an opinionated framework, but only if it's my opinions.
It just means he needs to create his own.
That's what, and at the end of the day, you can pick and choose and make your own and build your own templates and stuff. But I wanted to bring this full circle because we kind of started out talking about, Laravel being the Apple ecosystem of backend frameworks. And now here we are talking about front-end frameworks and hosting. And if you just buy into Vercel, then everything's done nicely for you. So I think the takeaway here is, are you more of an Apple person or are you more of an Android PC person? You got to decide your path.
Don't say it like that.
It's tough to say it that way. Yeah, it's and it's one of those things where it's like, because I've heard it put even in the sense of like Apple versus like Linux even too, of like, okay, you have distros that are kind of like all put together for you, but there are separate services, separate things, and maybe like paid options, stuff like that. But then you also have Mac OS. That's where it's like, okay, I know that everything just kind of works, and I can install anything. It probably has a Mac OS version kind of thing. So yeah, when it comes down to it, I think there's so much to be. I think the takeaway, at least for me, and like what kept me moving forward within Laravel, was I also like knowing when things just work when I need them to, not even first party related, but externally community driven stuff. If I look at a 8-year-old post on Stack Overflow on Laravel, things maybe have changed in some way, shape, or form, but for the most part, it's still exactly the same, because it's using those same infrastructure, that same patterns, those same pieces of code. I think that's tough within the JavaScript ecosystem. I think longevity has something like there's benefits to that. You can't just say, okay, now we're just going to fix everything within JavaScript. It kind of has to be 10 plus years to see what that looks like. But I think that's something that always has kind of come up on the back of my mind. Like I have, I could pull up GitHub and pull a random Laravel package in to do something super niche and super specific. And for the most part, it probably just works.
Yeah. Yep. Brad, was there anything else you wanted to ask before I pivot? Okay.
No.
So the next, I didn't prep you for this, Josh. So hopefully you're ready. For the next segment of the show, we have our picks and plugs, where we pick something that we like and we plug something generally that we worked on. Yeah. So does anybody have picks and plugs? I'm scrambling a little bit. Okay, Brad, you go first.
Sure. Okay, so I just purchased a bunch of like office stuff, like fun tech stuff, with my Stripe stipend that they give me for starting up.
Nice.
And one of the things that I got that I really like, this is dangerous. I'm going to move my computer while it's plugged in. Is this like really cool looking laptop stand.
Ooh, okay.
And so I just ordered double one because now I've got a work computer and a personal computer. And so it matches my desk perfectly. It's like the walnut color. And so they can sit vertical now when I want to change what computer I'm connected to. It's just like bloop, right next to each other. Nice. Right now I've got computers and screens all over the place. I got to clean it up a little bit.
I have the one from 12 South.
Yeah.
Arc. Yeah.
I have one, but I'm not using it. It's from Human Centric. I used to be using it, but then I switched to having my stand hold it as a second display. Like it's like on a monitor arm.
Oh, on an arm? That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it makes it so I can like bring it up here if I want to. Oh, I just broke my camera.
Yeah, that's why I was like, it's a dangerous move to be moving this. Then I guess I'll just plug my Blue Sky account. Amy, I'm trying to catch up to you on Blue Sky.
I still haven't posted, but I was at a conference yesterday and everybody was like, what's your Blue Sky? So it's like, okay, writing's on the wall.
It's been really fun over there. Twitter is just a bunch of like
bots,
spam accounts following me, and bots and suggested stuff that I don't care about, and politics and news. And I'm just like, it's like Facebook. Why am I even looking at this app anymore? So Blue Sky's where it's at. Josh, you come up with anything?
Yeah, so I have two picks. My first pick, more tech related, is this just super. I've had it for like 8 years, I think, or maybe a little less, but this is like this Anchor USB hub, like a powered one. I feel like I only charge it maybe like once every 2 weeks, but it's so nice. I'll just like keep it in my pocket and then just like take it places with me. So it's so nice to be able to like literally even like plug my laptop into it and like if I needed like a little bit like extra power, or like plug my phone into it. So like I keep that everywhere with me and I travel with it. Like it's so nice when I forget, especially when I forget like wall outlets, because I never really plug my MacBook in because it's in my desk and I unplug it and I take it home. I never like plug it in, so I always forget my charger, and that's always helpful to have. My other pick, I don't know if I can send anything in the chat, but if anyone let me grab the link to them real quick. They're called the Grethers Sugar-Free Black Currant Pastilles Remedy for Dry Mouth Relief. It's a huge, super long name. But they are amazing. They're like they're not cough drops. They're like gummies. And so I like gummies a lot. I sing a lot, especially like on the weekends. And I use them for like for like sore throat or like when my voice feels just like rough. I use them. I have a can sitting on my desk. I don't have it right now because I put it in the other room, but I usually have a can sitting on my desk so I can take one before I start recording a video too, because like it helps. It helps so much for voice.
I should have talked to you before I recorded this episode.
Yeah, they're like I'll send you send you the link. And then my plug would be I guess I do have a Blue Sky account as well. That's joshsiri.com. And then my YouTube channel is Josh Siri as well. So at Josh Siri, Cirre.
Awesome. Okay, so for my pick, I'm going to pick this JBL portable speaker. It has a nice little hook on it. I usually have a carabiner on my bag. I just attach it. So I actually got this from Postman. James and I went to the PostCon in May, and they gave this away as a influencer gift. But this has become something that I travel with all the time. So at night, I've gotten to the point where I have to have white noise going while I'm sleeping. So I'll just like play it on here, or in the morning while I'm getting ready, have music. It just sounds better than my laptop speakers, and carry it around the room with me. So highly recommend that. And then for my plug, I will also plug Blue Sky. My apologies, I've not posted on it yet. I will post. But help me stay ahead of Brad.
Oh, I'm catching up fast. My phone's been buzzing.
Well, you're actually posting, so that probably makes a difference, right?
Yeah. Hey, that should be your thing. You should just not post on Blue Sky. Like,
what's the most I can get
without? Yeah. Like, keep plugging it, keep talking about it, and then just never post.
Oh man. Well, here's the thing. Twitter or X has become like my announcement channel. So like even today, hey, we're going live. Watch. And so I think that's my biggest fear with like Twitter going away. It's like, oh, what do I announce on? And so it's like I want people to know, I've got to do Blue Sky, or even just like looking at LinkedIn, like do I want to be more active there? I mean, just kind of diversifying, right? So I have some things that I'm pretty excited about that are coming up. Actually, I should have picked that. I have Advent of JS and Advent of CSS that I'm running in December. It's going to be vanilla, and I'm pretty sure I'm just running the challenges this year. I'm not going to provide solutions. If you go right now, you can purchase the solutions, but I think I'm going to just disable that. And everybody's been just signing up for the challenges anyways. But anyways, check that out. It's free. So I have to announce it somewhere. I haven't announced it yet. And then, I'll save the other. Listen, keep tuning in for the next announcement. It's for January 1. So, I'll tell you, I'm bad at secrets. I decided I'm going to build 12 apps next year. So I'm going to build an app a month. Yeah, I'm going to do it. I've just decided I'm going to do it. So
maybe I'll join you.
Yes,
you can make it like is it going to be like one of those things where people can join you too?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'll send you the link. So I have a website I've been working on too, just to like help track all the stuff I've been working on. Have you heard of Peter Levels?
Yes.
I've been fascinated by what he's doing. And then I know Brad and I have been talking about Mark Liu, by just like build stuff, learn stuff, and figure out what has the most traction. So I'm like, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to build 12 apps.
There you go.
So, okay. Before we sign off, Amalite did ask a question early on, and I did not ask it. So my apologies. But they wanted to know, where do I start for getting into PHP and Laravel?
Yeah, I think the start is at laravel.com, and then the getting started page is kind of like the installation piece. And so we kind of revamped just recently on what that looks like. There's one command for both Mac OS, Windows PowerShell, and Linux that basically, if you don't have PHP Composer, the Laravel installer installed, it will install everything for you. So that way you can just run Laravel new. And that would be like the command that it just kind of just runs out of the box. In terms of learning, there is bootcamp.laravel.com. bootcamp.laravel.com is one of my favorite great resources. One that we're also kind of like looking to, what does it look like to kind of revamp this and also like update this in a way. But it basically takes you through the process of building an application in your preferred front end from start to finish, using queues, crons, events, a whole bunch of stuff that is more Laravel and backend specific in a lot of ways. There are additional resources for if you're like video driven. There's some resources like on Laracast as well.
And I will share this. So I oh, look at that. Laracast has a 50% off all plans right now.
There you go.
Going on. So I looked at Laravel maybe like 7-ish years ago and had kind of dabbled in it. And then, I don't know, just wasn't necessarily doing, well, kind of got into JavaScript stuff and have recently gone back to Laravel and tried to figure out, okay, what has changed since then. So I'm a big fan of Jeffrey Way. He's the guy behind Laracasts, but he also has a series called the 30 Days to Learn Laravel 11. It's a very approachable series. You could do one a day. I just kind of knocked through a bunch of them. But that's also a great place. He does a good job of explaining things. And as I mentioned earlier, Josh does have a class or a course on Laracasts all about Livewire. So I started going through that one too. I'm gonna pull it up.
Yeah. That course is great, especially like it won't teach you everything Livewire specific. I do have on my, sorry for the other plug, but I do have another video on my channel that's basically like a Livewire crash course if you are interested in Livewire specifically. But that course on Laracast is also a great thing if you're just like, hey, I want to follow along with like an actual application.
Cool. Amazing. Well, Josh, thanks again for coming on.
Oh yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Appreciate it.
It's been awesome.
Yeah, it's good to see you again. And for now, that's all we got. And I'm gonna go ahead. Thanks for hanging out in the chat, especially Josh, or not Josh, Jason and Emilite. I don't know. And Tanner, I missed Tanner. He's
right there at the beginning. Yeah.
I don't know if he stuck around to the end. Cool.
That was sick, man. I really appreciate it. It was good conversation.
Yeah.
Thanks. It was fun.